Chapter 27. Now only Louise can end this nightmare. Before leaving, Siddle thought of something and returned with the crowbar in front of Freddy. When Siddle found Louise, she was hiding in a small, narrow wooden partition, surrounded by random objects and trash piled up haphazardly. Siddle. The first moment the trembling little girl saw her friend, her gentle light blue eyes revealed a look of surprise. She looked at the girl in front of her in disbelief. Siddle's long blonde hair seemed to have been cut by something, the uneven strands tucked behind her ears. Her pretty white face had no expression, her blue eyes were cold and gloomy. Her right hand was holding a rusty crowbar covered in dust, the tip of the crowbar was still dripping with an unknown liquid. Her left hand was holding a leather glove, on the 5 fingertips were 5 sharp iron claws. Ah, Siddle looked at the little girl, waving the glove on her left hand. Look, I got Freddy's weapon. Before leaving, she conveniently took the glove from Freddy's hand before he revived. It really wasn't good to leave something so dangerous to a madman. Siddle conveniently put it on in front of Louise. Although it was a bit loose, it was still barely usable. Siddle waved her hand back and forth with satisfaction, making a whistling sound. No, Louise opened her eyes wide and looked at Siddle in horror. I just wanted to ask, are you okay? Her dress was torn, revealing several severe wounds on her left shoulder, the red flesh still losing blood. Louise ran over, wanting to check on Siddle's physical condition, but accidentally saw her back covered in blood. Oh my God! Louise covered her mouth in horror to stop herself from screaming. What did you do? Are these wounds still painful? The little girl anxiously looked up, tears welling up again, sobbing softly. What should I do? Siddle tilted her head, only now remembering that she was still injured. If Louise hadn't mentioned it, she would have almost forgotten. It's okay. She didn't have time to comfort the worried and scared Louise now, so she just grabbed her wrist and said gently, I came to take you to see something. What? Louise looked up in confusion. A good play. Siddle curled her lips coldly, but her blue eyes had no trace of a smile, and were chillingly calm. You will be the only audience. Don't be afraid. Because she had a crowbar in her hand, she couldn't fix Louise's messy hair, and could only calmly look at her. I said I would protect you, nothing can hurt you. This is just a nightmare, she said softly, it will be fine when you wake up. Louise half understands and half understands, muttering, I know, this is a nightmare. She just doesn't know how to end this, and in her dream the evil spirit is still chasing after her. Although today seems to be the most comfortable nightmare, since meeting Siddle she hasn't seen Freddy. Siddle pulls her hand and walks forward, Louise obediently follows. Siddle doesn't tell her that she killed Freddy twice. Some things are better seen with your own eyes. Siddle quickly brings Louise to a place. This is Freddy's old residence, the children's skulls are still burning in the fireplace. Siddle hides Louise in layers of curtains. Hide here, the corner of her mouth curls into a faint smile. After that, remember to watch me. Watch me personally kill him. Siddle turns around and goes out, she wants to lure Freddy here. By the time, Freddy had probably revived and was wandering around the corridors looking for Siddle. It had to be said that this iron claw was really useful. This was what Siddle learned after she used it to break a steel manhole. Not long after, Siddle met Freddy again. It was just that at this time, Freddy's hands were empty, and his hat was nowhere to be seen. She wondered if he had forgotten to pick it up and put it back on after reviving. A thin man with an ugly and ferocious face, as if a gust of wind could make that skinny body fall down. He staggered forward a few steps and faced the little girl covered in blood, with a cold expression, his left hand holding an iron claw, his right hand holding a crowbar on the narrow path. For a moment, it was impossible to tell who was the perverted murderer. Siddle held the crowbar and looked at Freddy, who was looking at the glove she had taken from him. She sneered and said, Come and catch me. If you catch me, I'll return your things to you. After saying that, she didn't look at Freddy's distorted, angry face and quickly jumped down from the upper floor. Freddy's lair was on the lower floor. Because she didn't know when Freddy would be able to use his teleportation ability, Siddle could only return there as soon as possible. She hung herself on the balcony made of steel bars, her left hand grabbed the railing, used the strength in her waist to hook her ankle onto the iron railing on the first floor, and gently swung down. Then she heard Freddy's angry, helpless screams from the upper floor. Siddle smirked, running towards Freddy's lair right in front of him. I wonder what Freddy would think when he returned home and saw the messy ground as if a robber had just visited. But he wouldn't have the chance to think anymore. The moment Freddy chased Siddle into his lair, his fate was predetermined. Just as the skinny man in the red and blue striped sweater chased after him, he slid down on the ground, and after falling comically on the ground, the iron block hanging in the air suddenly hit his head, and at the same time, the long, thin iron nails on the ground stabbed into his throat. But things weren't over yet. Siddle, who had secretly arranged everything, slowly walked out with a crowbar, leisurely turned her wrist, prepared to exert her strength, kicked the iron block aside, stepped on the man's ugly head with one foot, and swung the crowbar down. Blood splattered everywhere. Siddle seemed to be calculating something in her head, silently looking towards the corner of the house where Louise was hiding. Because in Louise's subconscious, the person who was killed would bleed. That was why she had to make Freddy bleed. The little girl was still obediently hiding inside, motionless, only staring at the scene outside with her misty eyes filled with fear. The scene in the dream was truly unbelievable. Siddle shook her hand. Perhaps her left arm had lost too much blood and was shaking slightly, but she still gripped the crowbar tightly and swung it down again. Shoo! At this moment, to Siddle, the sound of the sharp hook piercing the flesh was very pleasant to the ears. She happily pressed down on this dead body, fresh blood splattered everywhere, a few drops splashed on her face, but she didn't care at all. Louise hid in the corner, looking at her friend who looked like a perverted murderer in horror. Her expression was calm, her eyes were determined, her messy golden hair hung down by her ears, her face was covered with drops of blood, one drop fell right under her eye, like a bright red mole. She glanced at Louise, then suddenly curled her lips and said, "Look at me, Louise." She quickly changed the direction of the crowbar. The target changed from the head to the neck. After the sounds like the grinding of iron from hell, Louise heard a sharp clatter. Siddle crushed Freddy's neck. She bent down and pulled the head off, lifted the bald man's head, and smiled as she turned the head to face Louise. "Did you see that?" She smiled and said, "The ugly monster chasing you is dead. This is just a nightmare. All the terrible things don't exist. No one can hurt you. Louise, it's time for you to wake up." She had a relieved smile on her face, but in fact she was still alert in her heart. Her right foot moved from stepping on Freddy's body to his spine, always paying attention to the movement under her feet. After all, Freddy had the ability to revive. And she wanted to take Louise out of the dream before this monster revived. "Come here, Louise," Siddle continued to comfort her. "I killed him, no one can hurt you anymore." Louise really slowly walked out of the corner of the room. Her eyes were filled with tears, slightly red, and her white nose was also red from crying. "Siddle, do you want this ugly monster to continue appearing in your dreams?" Siddle frowned as if she didn't understand. "It's all fake, just a nightmare. Now that you're awake, you'll never see him again. Actually, I really don't understand why you imagine such an ugly character." She seemed speechless. Siddle felt the headless body under her feet start to move, calmly stepping down with more force, her heart trembling slightly. If Louise couldn't wake up this time, it would probably be even more difficult in the future. Fortunately, it seemed like the headless body that she had stepped on had calmed down. To be honest, Siddle was a little scared at the moment. The human head she was holding in her hands suddenly opened its eyes and let out a strange laugh, then turned into a monster and killed Louise, who was scared unconscious. However, the little girl raised her red eyes, looking at Siddle in a daze, one hand holding the person's head, one foot stepping on the body, blood all over, saying to herself, "This is just a nightmare." Yes, This is just a nightmare, Freddy doesn't exist. Siddle affirmed. The little girl muttered after Siddle, Freddy doesn't exist either. After she finished saying these words, the surrounding space suddenly became distorted. Siddle saw everything in front of her strangely broken, including Louise in front of her. Louise looked over in confusion, as if wanting to open her mouth to call out to Siddle, but immediately after that she disappeared on the spot. Siddle woke up on the bed. The room was dark, and the window was also dark. Tonight there was no moon. She turned around, seeing Louise with tears all around. Her pillow was soaked with tears. Looking at Siddle in confusion, Siddle, the little girl touched her face and asked in surprise, why am I crying? Siddle was stunned, don't you remember? What? Louise looked at her blankly, what are you talking about, Siddle? What should I remember? Her soft voice was filled with doubt, and she suddenly said strangely, Siddle, I don't know why, but now that I see you, I feel very reassured. Siddle was silent for a moment, nothing. Maybe you're in a strange bed, which is causing your sleep quality to be worse. She tucked the blanket in for Louise, turned up the air conditioner a degree, and conveniently took 2 wet tissues from the bedside table and gave them to Louise. Wipe your face first. Oh, okay. Louise obediently took them, and Siddle turned around and got out of bed. I'm going to the bathroom, she said, quietly glancing at the iron nails and crowbar beside the bed. Why are these 2 brought out? The room was very dark. If it weren't for the silvery iron claws, Siddle probably wouldn't have seen them. She gently picked up these 2 things, while Louise on the bed was still wiping her tears without knowing anything. She was still wondering why she was crying, and Siddle had already entered the bathroom in the room. Only then did she dare to turn on the light. The iron claw gloves were clean and brand new, and the crowbar still looked like a fire poker, covered in rust, but the head of the crowbar no longer had the blood stains from when she hit Freddy. Siddle frowned, put these 2 things on the ground, and picked up the bottle of cleaning fluid in front of the mirror. She looked up and was startled. The bottle of cleaning fluid in the mirror had turned into a head. The human head with a fierce, twisted face and full of scars was looking at her with a sinister smile. Little girl, the head's mouth opened and closed, emitting a cold, hoarse laugh, I caught you.